So The Republic is an awesome book that can enrich your life. What is justice or morality? Why should you be just or moral? These are the main questions that Plato addresses in The Republic, and your answer to these questions are important and again can determine the quality of your life. So in this series, I'll pull some of the most important primary source excerpts from Plato's Republic and add my commentary to help you understand this classic. Now, many modern people think they know more about morality simply because they live in the modern period. But this is false. In fact, many modern people seem more confused about morality than ever before. So I claim that every idea that you have about morality has been thoroughly examined by Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle over 2,000 years ago, and the answers that Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle gave are much more profound, useful, and beneficial than most modern works. And this is one reason The Republic is a classic. So let's jump into The Republic. Again, the central questions are, what is justice and goodness, and why be just? Let's start with Book 1, and there are 10 books in The Republic. So in Book 1, a group of people, including Socrates, get together and begin discussing the nature of justice. Now, the first line states that Socrates goes down to Piraeus. This going down foreshadows later parts of the Republic in which the philosopher must return to the prisoners in the dark cave instead of staying in the sunlit and free world outside the cave. Indeed, Glaucon and others force him to come to the house to chat. And this foreshadows another important theme, which is the relation between power, being forced, and knowledge, Socrates, or between power and justice. And this is still a modern theme, as when Foucault and other postmodernists argue that almost everything is really about power. So in short, the first part of Book 1 is where Plato sets up what is to come. And I recommend reading Book 1 again after reading the entire Republic. The Republic is a book that must be read more than once to understand. Now, as they explore the nature of justice or goodness, several answers will be proposed, but Socrates shows there are contradictions or other problems with each answer. It is often the case in Plato's early dialogues. The discussion at the end of Book 1 ends in Aporia. Aporia is a state of knowing that you don't know, though you do know why the proposed answers are incomplete or wrong. So in the next 9 books of the Republic, Plato will develop a rich view of justice and give you a profound answer for what justice is and why you should try to live a just or morally good life. Now, one interesting feature you'll encounter in Book 1 is the good old Socratic method, which is Socrates' way of asking questions that bring up exceptions. So, for example, if Socrates asked, "What is a fish?" and a child answered, "A fish is an animal that swims," Socrates would then ask the following Socratic question: "Is a dog a fish, since it can swim?" The answer is obviously no, a dog is not a fish, and so the child realizes he does not intellectually understand what a fish is, and so he continues seeking an answer. The child is in a state of aporia. Now, of course, Socrates does that with adults, with questions like what is knowledge and virtue and excellence and justice and the ideal political state. Okay, so back to Book 1. The first guy that Socrates talks to is Cephalus. He's an old rich man. Now, Cephalus did a lot of bad things when he was young, and he let his desires run wild. But now that he's old, he believes he's wiser. So Socrates asks him, what's it like being old? And what do you think justice or goodness is? Well, the first funny point is that Cephalus recognizes that it is easier to pursue justice and reason when you are older because your flesh is weaker. So if your sexual functions no longer work as well, then it's easy to be celibate, right? Cephalus also says it's good to have money because it helps you honor your legal and moral obligations. For example, he can give money to the people he may have hurt when he was young. He can donate to charities, and he can make sacrifices to the gods to avoid the possibility of a bad afterlife. So in short, Cephalus argues that justice is telling the truth and honoring obligations, and having money can help you do this. So this is a practical, real-world answer. Now, Socrates then starts a Socratic dialogue in which the conclusion is this: justice cannot be given a person what is his, or honoring legal obligations, because it would be unjust to give a man back his weapon if the man goes crazy and in a heated moment wants to kill many people. It's unjust to give his weapon back because it would endanger the lives of others. And so Cephalus' definition of justice as giving a man what belongs to him and so on, telling the truth, it's incomplete. Now, before going on, let's listen to 3 minutes of this dialogue.
But may I ask you another question? What do you consider to be the greatest blessing which you have reaped from your wealth? 1. he said, of which I could not expect easily to convince others. For let me tell you, Socrates, that when a man thinks himself to be near death, fears and cares enter into his mind which he never had before. The tales of a world below, and the punishment which is exacted there of deeds done here, were once a laughing matter to him. But now he is tormented with the thought that they may be true, either from the weakness of age, or because he is now drawing near to that other place, he has a clearer view of these things. Suspicions and alarms crowd thickly upon him, and he begins to reflect and consider what wrongs he has done to others. And when he finds that the sum of his transgressions is great, he will many a time, like a child, start up in his sleep for fear, and he is filled with dark forebodings. But to him who is conscious of no sin, sweet hope, as Pindar charmingly says, is the kind nurse of his age. Hope, he says, cherishes the soul of him who lives in justice and holiness, and is the nurse of his age and the companion of his journey. Hope which is mightiest to sway the restless soul of man. How admirable are his words! And the great blessing of riches, I do not say to every man, but to a good man, is that he has had no occasion to deceive or to defraud others, either intentionally or unintentionally. And when he departs to the world below, he is not in any apprehension about offerings due to the gods or debts which he owes to men. Now, to this peace of mind the possession of wealth greatly contributes, and therefore I say that, setting one thing against another, of the many advantages which wealth has to give, to a man of sense this is, in my opinion, the greatest. Well said, Cephalus, I replied. But as concerning justice, what is it? To speak the truth and to pay your debts, no more than this? And even to this are there not exceptions? Suppose that a friend, when in his right mind, has deposited alms with me, and he asks for them when he is not in his right mind. Ought I to give them back to him? No one would say that I ought, or that I should be right in doing so, any more than they would say that I ought always to speak the truth to one who is in his condition. You are quite right, he replied. But then, I said, speaking the truth and paying your debts is not a correct definition of justice.
Okay, so we heard Socrates using the Socratic method to show that justice is not simply telling the truth or giving each person what is his, because it wouldn't be just to give a madman his weapon, and it wouldn't be just to tell the truth to the madman if he is asking where Bob is hiding. So Socrates has shown that Cephalus's definition of justice is too thin. And notice that Cephalus seems to represent the old traditions of religion, sacrifice, honoring one's obligations. The old religion has, in a sense, been cleared away now. Morality is not just telling the truth, honoring debts, having money, or making sacrifices to the gods out of self-interest. And this is really important, for Socrates will show in the Republic that one should be just not simply for any benefits of justice, but also because justice is its own reward. One should seek justice for its own sake, as one seeks beautiful music. Again, this is something Socrates later seeks to prove. So Cephalus departs, and his son, Polemarchus, continues the argument. Now notice there are younger people present now, for the Republic is essentially about how to live well as you move into old age, not simply making up in old age for how you lived when you were young. That would be a different book. We want to know how to live well when all your desires and ambitions are on fire and the future is waiting. So Polemarchus builds on his father's definition, and he defines justice as repaying debts by giving your enemies help in your friends' harm. In the process, he cites some authorities on this, and he seems to represent an appeal to authority, while Cephalus seemed to represent religion and the businessman approach. Now, according to Polemarchus, then, doing good to friends and harm to one's enemies, that's what it means to give each man its due, or his due. Socrates applies the Socratic method and finds many problems with this view of justice. The central point is that this is not justice because the just man never does evil, even to his enemies. And I am reminded here of Jesus, who says, pray for your enemies. The just man is like a keeper of horses who cares for all horses and brings out their excellence. So like the horse keeper, the good, the just man does not harm his enemies. In the good man's mind, he has no enemies. So surely people will hate the good man as they hated and killed Socrates, but the good man hates no one and seeks the best for all. He has no resentment. That's so freeing. That's the ideal, at least, of the good man. So when Socrates interacts with people in pursuit of goodness and truth, he seeks the good in everyone, even those who hate them. The purpose of his type of education is to educe. Educe means to lead out. Educe, education, to lead out of the cave of ignorance, to nurture the beautiful seed within. The good man wants to improve the well-being of all human beings. So Socrates' moral obligation is to challenge and improve the thinking of this young Polemarchus, because bad ideas can ruin your life. Let's listen to 2 minutes of this dialogue, 2 to 3 minutes, to get a feel for it. And as you listen, how would you respond? What do you think justice, morality, and goodness are? Do you think it's just about power, subjective feeling, or cultural approval? I tell you, every possible idea is explored in the Republic, even the ideas that arise from modern evolutionary ethics and postmodernism.
And instead of saying simply, as we did at first, that it is just to do good to our friends and harm to our enemies, we should further say, it is just to do good to our friends when they are good, and harm to our enemies when they are evil. Yes, that appears to me to be the truth. But ought the just to injure any one at all? Undoubtedly he ought to injure those who are both wicked and his enemies. When horses are injured, are they improved or deteriorated? The latter. Deteriorated, that is to say, in the good qualities of horses, not of dogs. Yes, of horses. And dogs are deteriorated in the good qualities of dogs, and not of horses? Of course. And will not men who are injured be deteriorated in that which is the proper virtue of man? Certainly. And that human virtue is justice? To be sure. Then men who are injured are of necessity made unjust. That is the result. But can the musician by his art make men unmusical? Certainly not. Or the horseman by his art make them bad horsemen? Impossible. And can the just by justice make men unjust? Or, speaking generally, can the good by virtue make them bad? Assuredly not. Any more than heat can produce cold, it cannot, or drought moisture. Clearly not. Nor can the good harm any one. Impossible. And the just is the good? Certainly. Then to injure a friend or any one else is not the act of a just man, but of the opposite, who is the unjust. I think that what you say is quite true, Socrates. Then if a man says that justice consists in the repayment of debts, and that good is the debt which a just man owes to his friends, and evil the debt which he owes to his enemies, to say this is not wise. For it is not true, if, as has been clearly shown, the injuring of another can be in no case just. I agree with you, said Polemarchus. Then you and I are prepared to take up arms against anyone who attributes such a saying to Simonides or Bias or Pittacus, or any other wise man or seer. I am quite ready to do battle at your side, he said. Shall I tell you whose I believe the saying to be? Whose? I believe that Periander or Perdiccas or Xerxes or Ismenias the Theban, or some other rich and mighty man, who had a great opinion of his own power, was the first to say that justice is doing good to your friends and harm to your enemies. Most true, he said. Yes, I said, but if this definition of justice also breaks down, what other can be offered?
So Socrates has it disposed with that definition. Now at this point, the great sophist Thrasymachus enters the conversation. Thrasymachus is a fierce lion, and I've encountered many Thrasymachai when discussing ethics with scholars and students. In my mind, Thrasymachus is representative of the many subjectivists, relativists, postmodernists, skeptics, and nihilists. He is the anti-Socrates. Like many postmodernists, Thrasymachus seeks to delegitimize the idea of morality by defining it away as the interest of the stronger. And his other claim is that it just doesn't pay to be just or moral, though it may pay to appear to be just. Justice is an unnatural restraint on our desires. It's a convention. So like Nietzsche, over 2,000 years later, Thrasymachus would agree that common forms of morality and common ideas of justice are not what they seem, but are instead based on a struggle for power, or based on darker forces like resentment. Thrasymachai, like octopi, are everywhere, using their many tentacles to entrap and deceive. So Thrasymachus believes you should ignore common ideas of justice and morality. He says, don't be a sucker, don't be a sheep. Fulfill your desires and get the power that you need to do that. Now, let's listen to a 3-minute excerpt when Thrasymachus enters the conversation. Let's get ready to rumble. And I must say that if you discuss morality with a group of people, there will be a skeptical Thrasymachus who's skeptical about the definition, possibility, or value of being what people call moral.
Several times in the course of the discussion, Thrasymachus had made an attempt to get the argument into his own hands, and had been put down by the rest of the company, who wanted to hear the end. But when Polemarchus and I had done speaking, and there was a pause, he could no longer hold his peace, and gathering himself up, he came at us like a wild beast, seeking to devour us. We were quite panic-stricken at the sight of him. He roared out to the whole company, "What folly, Socrates, has taken possession of you all, and why, silly billies, do you knock under to one another? I say that if you want really to know what justice is, you should not only ask but answer, and you should not seek honor to yourself from the refutation of an opponent, but have your own answer. For there is many a one who can ask and cannot answer. And now I will not have you say that justice is duty or advantage or profit or gain or interest, for this sort of nonsense will not do for me. I must have clearness and accuracy." I was panic-stricken at his words, and could not look at him without trembling. Indeed, I believe that if I had not fixed my eye upon him, I should have been struck dumb. But when I saw his fury rising, I looked at him first, and was therefore able to reply to him. "Thrasymachus," I said, with a quiver, "don't be hard upon us. Polemarchus and I may have been guilty of a little mistake in the argument, but I can assure you that the error was not intentional. If we were seeking for a piece of gold, you would not imagine that we were knocking under to one another, and so losing our chance of finding it. And why, when we are seeking for justice, a thing more precious than many pieces of gold, do you say that we are weakly yielding to one another, and not doing our utmost to get at the truth? Nay, my good friend, we are most willing and anxious to do so. But the fact is that we cannot. And if so, you people who know all things should pity us, and not be angry with us." "How characteristic of Socrates," he replied, with a bitter laugh. "That's your ironical style."
Okay, so that's how the conversation begins, and it gets pretty ugly at some points. The conversation is also somewhat convoluted, so let me see if I can simplify it, identify some major themes, and also get into a little bit of detail. Now, arguing with Thrasymachus is like arguing with someone who believes logic is patriarchal or the mere tool of baser desires. Sophists use logic when it benefits them, but if your logical arguments don't benefit them, then they call you logocentric, or they question logic itself. So you cannot win arguments with true sophists because they don't accept the rules of the game, and they cut off the branch that both of you are sitting upon. But Socrates can paralyze or silence Thrasymachus and meet him jab for jab, right? He'll combat rational arguments when Thrasymachus chooses to use them, and he can deflect emotion and rhetorical arguments when Thrasymachus disperses them. Now, according to Michael Sugrue, Thrasymachus is ultimately a nihilist, and you cannot really reason with a nihilist because nihilism collapses in on itself. The best you can do is silence a nihilist. When you're too focused on self and power, even language breaks down, for, as Wittgenstein noted, language is essentially a social enterprise. So modern and ancient sophists like Thrasymachus, they don't want to debate or dialogue with you. They don't want that give and take. They want to give finely tuned speeches. They want rhetoric. So they're like Stephen Colbert or Fox News or MSNBC News. They give finely edited rhetorical presentations instead of dialoguing with people. And if they have legal power, they want to silence you. Okay, it's ultimately pure power politics. Everything, it's a product of power, social constructs, and me. Okay, so Thrasymachus asked Socrates to define justice instead of simply tearing down definitions. Now, of course, The ironic Socrates says, "Oh, but Thrasymachus, I just don't know. You know much better than me. Please enlighten me. Please enlighten all of us. You get paid for this." Now, a very interesting point arises where Thrasymachus asks for money for his teaching. And this is Plato illustrating the difference between philosophers like Socrates and sophists like Thrasymachus. For Plato, knowledge is its own reward. And later, we'll see, he thinks justice is too. But for Thrasymachus, rational persuasion is about gratifying desires and earning money. It might be good to appear to be just, but not really be just for Thrasymachus. Justice is not its own reward. Now, of course, Socrates has no money, and so his friend Glaucon offers Thrasymachus money. "For the sake of money, speak," he says. All right, so Thrasymachus defines justice at this point as the advantage of the stronger. And what he's saying is that the physical world and political world operate on the principle of power, and they don't follow any moral law. There's no moral law. Many of you believe this. I encounter people all the time who believe this. Like many postmodernists, Thrasymachus sees politics as the attempt to get and maintain power. That's all it is. It's not for the good of the subjects, not really. Now, this should also remind you of Machiavelli and Nietzsche. Rulers make laws to benefit themselves, not their subjects. Justice and morality are shams. It's just the interests of the stronger at work, power. So that's Thrasymachus's definition of justice. Now, the argument will get a bit convoluted here, but hold on to the end and keep in mind that Socrates is, in a way, intentionally striving for a tie, stalemate, or sense of aporia. Aporia is knowing that you don't know, so that he can more deeply explore justice in the rest of the Republic. Okay, Socrates first tries to counter that even rulers can make mistakes, and so they'll pass laws that they think are in their interests, but are not really in their interests. So justice, that is obeying laws, is not always in the interests of the stronger, the rulers. Now, of course, Thrasymachus counters, and he argues that the ruler's intent is to benefit themselves, and that when they pass laws that don't really benefit themselves, they're not really rulers. They're not the stronger at that point in time. So in a similar way, a mathematician who makes a mistake in calculation is not a mathematician when he's making the mistake. Now, that's an important argument because Socrates is about to use it against him. So again, a mathematician, when he makes a mistake, is not a mathematician. Now, at this point, Socrates takes quite a bit of time to argue that each techne is focused on the good of its subject. For example, the techne, the art of medicine, is focused on the good of its patient. And so the doctor, as doctor, is focused on the patient's good, not earning money. He may do the art of medicine to earn money, but when he's practicing the art of medicine, when he's a doctor, he's seeking the good of the patient. No art is concerned with its own interest because it has none. The horseman is concerned with the interest of the horse. Navigation gives safety on the seas. Payment gives money. Now, perhaps you can best see this point by seeing that a physician can do great work but not be paid. An artist can create a beautiful painting but not be paid. In short, the physician is someone who heals bodies, not someone who focuses on taking care of himself financially. As a shoemaker, a cobbler is someone who makes shoes, not someone who takes care of himself. And the shepherd, as a shepherd, is concerned with the good of his flock, not with his own benefit. Now, at this point, I think it's also very interesting to distinguish between power and competence. Thrasymachus, like many modern people, think that all hierarchies are based on power, right? All differences in income. But this is not the case. For example, there's a plumber in my town who's excellent, and so he has a lot of business, and he's earned a very fine income compared to the worst plumber in town. This difference between the rich and the poor plumber is not based on raw power. It's based on competence. The tendency to reduce everything to power fails to recognize the role that competency plays in some hierarchies. Okay, so I'm just questioning Thrasymachus's spectacles, the lenses through which he views the world, which is a power lens there. Anyway, at this point, Thrasymachus gives an insult. He asks Socrates if he has a wet nurse, because if so, she would wipe your nose, right? She needs to wipe your nose. So Thrasymachus is engaging in an ad hominem attack. Remember, he's a sophist who's paid for his teaching, and he cannot be made a fool. Now, Socrates responds in a dignified way and asks Thrasymachus to enlighten him. He then says, Thrasymachus says, that Socrates has made a mistake because the shepherd does not seek the good of the sheep. He's seeking his own self-interest because he wants to shear the sheep for clothes or kill it for food. Thrasymachus concludes that every techne ultimately serves the interests of the technician, not its sheep or other subjects. Now, notice this is essentially an argument for psychological egoism as well, which is the idea that every human motivation is directed towards self-benefit. Thrasymachus represents a constellation of ideas that I encounter frequently in the modern world, and this constellation consists of subjectivism, relativism, nihilism, skepticism, and yes, psychological egoism. All right. So Socrates now responds to the shepherd argument. Socrates first points out that according to Thrasymachus, the unjust man tries to get the better of everyone. The unjust man tries to get the better of his opposite, the just man, and also tries to get the better of other unjust men. The unjust man wants to satisfy his desires by any means necessary. And now Socrates asks a very subtle Socratic question. Do true artists, masters of their techne, do they want to get the better of everyone or just the non-experts? This is a really good Socratic question. The point is the true experts don't want to get the better of everyone. They only want to get the better of those who are non-experts. For example, Michael Suguru gives the example of a cardiologist, a doctor of the heart. Now, if I have a heart attack and the cardiologist has given me CPR, another cardiologist who walks into the room will not try to stop him or get the better of him because this cardiologist, this expert or master of his techne, is doing the right thing. Okay, but consider example 2, where I have a heart attack and a quack doctor comes in and starts a procedure that won't help me because he's a quack doctor. He doesn't know anything. Now, the expert cardiologist who walks in and sees this would want to stop the quack because he knows this quack procedure won't help. So the point is, the expert cardiologist doesn't want to get the better of other expert cardiologists. He wants to get the better of the non-expert, the quack. And this is because the non-expert is going to harm the patient, and the cardiologist, as cardiologist, seeks the good of the patient. Okay, that's interesting. Socrates then applies this to the real politician. If a statesman is ruling a country well to the benefit of the subjects, another great statesman doesn't want to take over, no more than the other cardiologists. But a real or expert statesman does want to get the better of the politician who's ruling in a way that does not help the subjects. So the true philosopher only wants to get the better of the ignorant man, while the ignorant man wants to get the better of everyone. So basically, Socrates' argument implies that Thrasymachus is ignorant. The point is, every art has artists who care about their domain, and these artists only want to get the better of those who don't understand their craft, their domain. There's an interesting section here where Socrates says the good man should get into politics, not because he wants to, but because if he doesn't, all these idiots will rule. Okay. Now, at this point, Plato writes a great line. It is, Thrasymachus blushes. He never blushes, right? So Thrasymachus needs to best Plato to earn money and make a living, but he hasn't. Plato has used jiu-jitsu, the Socratic method, to deflect and deflate his appeals to logos, pathos, and ethos. But here's where Book 1 ends. It ends in Aporia. Socrates ends it by saying he still doesn't know what justice or goodness is or why one should be just. And so he's drawing other people into the conversation. Book 1 ends kind of where we began. We just don't know. But at least we know why some of the poor answers are poor. So far, then, Socrates has only questioned some ideas that could ruin your life. But in the chapters to come, he will introduce ideas or ways of life that can directly enrich your life.